every single person that's at this table needs to be able to conduct business. And so I guess my first question would be to Erin, is, when having a KYC, is it better to have a full dossier, just get ready for it, it's all coming for you, with the basics, and then understanding that certain companies go into bigger detail depending upon where you are in the circumstance?
Yeah, I think my recommendation would be to absolutely do that, plan ahead. You're going to be asked like the basic, corporate documents, the passport, the driver's license, or some similar form of photo ID, certified, and the source of funds, and some sort of residential address verification. So I would absolutely recommend making sure you have all that on file for a client, because it seems like everybody's asking for that, and nobody will even, they won't even do business with you unless you forward all this information, rightly or wrongly. It's a reality that we are all living with. So I would definitely promote being prepared, because I have so many scenarios where it's, you just finished the first batch because the owners don't like to do this. They don't like to go in front of a notary with a document, and they just don't have time for this. So, you get it done, and you get the email saying, we're looking for a refresher KYC. It's incredibly frustrating to owners, to the people trying to manage the boat and the chartering and all the ancillary that go with it. So it would save a lot of hassle and time just to be prepared for it. So I would definitely recommend doing that.
So we're coming back to, you mentioned notarizing documents, apostling documents. So Thibault, because we did it this summer, how important is it? How essential is it? Because sometimes we've got clients, not in Europe that are doing it, and even we know that certain documents have different names, or refer to different things within the U.S. or between, the different locations. And so I know that the apostling things and the frustrations of notary, is something that's really, can kind of take the longest time. So just for the essentialness and, what you can get at least forward progress with the documents that you have, and then continue to follow up to try and get the things that people are less willing to give up.
That's the point, and I think that Erin mentioned it. Just make sure that well before the arrival of the boat in Europe, because we are mainly focused today on the European season of the boat, be prepared to have all those documents, both corporate documentation and KYC documentation ready. To go back quickly on the KYC, it literally became key in Monaco. You are all aware that we have been placed on the grey list now for a bit more than a year, which means that I would say more or less all companies operating in the yachting sector are listed by local authorities, and we are supposed, and even not supposed, we have to go to quite deep KYC. And of course, as the time is always crucial, even if I'm always recommending to our clients, try to anticipate things. The key is always to, as soon as possible, to define clearly what owners' intentions are for this coming season. But yes, just make sure that you have all those documents ready. To go back on the topic of the apostille documents, more and more we can see that in some jurisdictions we have finally managed to reduce the need of apostille documents, which is, for instance, not necessary in Italy, in France, in Monaco. However, there is still some jurisdiction where it remains 100% necessary. So
like
Spain, Greece, Croatia, where we still need to provide apostille documents. Yeah.
So then if you've provided everything, as the VAT agent, so can you use the same KYC for most of the different, so if you are a charter boat, let's say, and then you are applying for charter licenses everywhere, that same thing can generally apply, if you complete it for the season, then you're good for all locations.
Yeah, definitely, and I must say that that's also exactly in that way that we have launched H&D now more than 5 years ago, is to say, okay, we are trying to offer, when it is possible, to our clients one single point of contact for all the fiscal and customs matters upon the arrival of the boat in the Med, which means that yes, in terms of KYC, we will centralize everything. Of course, in every single jurisdiction that we are covering, we have our local entities, local lawyers, local accountants provide them with this complete KYC. But yes, in the end, the most important thing for us is always to identify who the UBO is, despite the number of companies that you can have in between the owning entity itself and the UBO. So we need to identify all the shareholders and beneficiaries if in the end we are facing the trust.
Yeah, and I see that a lot of people are sort of hesitant, particularly family offices or representatives, to give the passport of the UBO. And so I've seen over the course of the summer, some charters and some deals have fallen through because that information is not being, delivered. Paul, with regards to like KYC as far as crew is concerned, obviously vetting is now a really big deal in making sure that certification and everything is current and is not counterfeit. So how does that factor into crew selection or vetting crew?
Yeah, there's definitely been an increase in this that we've seen actually, to be honest with you. So obviously asking for certification from the candidates, from the crew members, then we do need to verify that to make sure licenses are valid, are correct, and we use a number of platforms for that, and there's quite a few interesting vetting services out there without obviously advertising today that can assist with that, but that's becoming even more crucial, and it's not just a certification, it's also references, background checks, and there has been some of that that's been out there in the public domain with some more high profile stories and incidents recently, but it's becoming more and more the norm that you really do question that the certification that's coming in from crew members and candidates that you are selecting, are they genuine? Are they real? Unfortunately, you're seeing perhaps certain nationalities where those forgeries are more commonplace, and certainly with some colleagues that I work with also with other recruitment agencies, particularly through Raising the Bar, through the Superyacht Alliance, we're seeing that we're able to share some of that information that we have to help ourselves in the industry. So, the word scam, we see this in our day-to-day life when you get the text message that suddenly says your delivery due, click on this link, it is exactly the same with some crew members, I'm afraid. So making sure they're verified, they're checked, using the relevant platforms that you have, things like credentials that's out there that some of you might be aware of, which is a great platform to help verify some certification, and checking with the issuing authority, whether that's the COC, the licence, or even the training centre where the STCW training is being done. You look at a certificate, you think, this doesn't quite seem right, make sure you follow good practice here in the policy to check on that certification.
And then also when it comes to having original certification and things like that, you've got some crew who forget where I left it at home, with all their originals, and so there's a little bit of a panic that comes with that. So I would think that
that does happen actually. I mean, it's the old story. It doesn't matter how many times you tell a crew member to take their original certification. Sometimes they do forget, and just depends on what the relationship is with the vessel or with the management of how you can then get either the original certification there, or if you need to try and get duplicates. But that, of course, is a time-consuming activity, and it can mean that a crew member is sent home because he or she hasn't come with their original certificates. It might be STCW, they've got the passport, got the medical, but then they've suddenly forgotten to pack the original STCW. Unfortunately, yes, that does happen. It has to be dealt with and followed up, and obviously that's a bit of a time-consuming thing to happen.
Yeah, and then I think too with boats traveling around, and certainly there's all sorts of visa issues that are coming up, based on nationalities and the like. So if somebody is visiting, let's say, a place in the Schengen area and they do not have their Schengen visa, how do you handle that with them, being checked in and not permitted to, leave the boat? Would that be more a NICS question?
Yeah, more NICS question from that side. We're getting crew to their point of embarkation, to make sure they're out there, but as far as disembarkation, really handing over often to the vessel and to the port agent to deal with what's necessary. I think Nick's probably a good man to talk about that. And also with visas, we know that regulations and rules are changing all the time, so to stay ahead of that is quite a task, to be honest with you, particularly when you're crewing and recruiting multinational crew from all around the world.
What do you think the most frustrating thing is right now, with sourcing and vetting crew? Understanding visas, do you have to have all of that stuff?
Well, it depends whether the vessel is operating in, so there are, I won't say ways around that, but let's say here we are in Europe, and you might be able to board a crew member in Turkey that doesn't need a visa, depending on the itinerary, depending on the port agent and the vessel. It always comes down to finding the right crew, and if you find the right person, you can then obviously ensure that you are then making sure they have the certification, get trained, and are fit, the right person person for the job. But I mean, it's not so much a part of this discussion, but finding crew is always a challenge.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there, but we all know how particular the yachting industry is, and we want that right person for that role. But then that is a kind of part of risk mitigation, because we are all, could be a risky choice. So it's then finding that right person and finding the right particular candidate. And as we know, different owners want different nationalities, so it's making sure we're matching the right candidate to the right job.
Yeah, and I think I'm struggling right now where we're going to go. There's two tangents, two roads that we can go down. So I think going to Luca really quickly, going back to crew, and again, making sure the right crew are on. We find as a manager, we've been through the ringer, all sorts of different, circumstances and the likes. But when it does come to matching the rights, making sure the employment is correct and that the crew all understand, how they're employed, and working with the yacht manager, on all those things. Like, again, coming back with, knowing the client and just making sure everybody understands their SDA. When you come in and looking at that, and I find that it's amazing how many crew have signed off on the thing and have absolutely no idea, what their rights are, what the rest of, the document has to say for them.
And that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Many crew members are not even aware of their MLC rights, right? On their complaint procedures, right? Or even going to safety management system, on the role of the DPA, right? This is really something we are focusing on, right? Because anyway, it's accidentally checked, right? By flag surveyors, for example. So, but going back to what Paul mentioned, if I can, yes, it's challenging to find the right crew, qualified, but trained crew is something different. You can have a very qualified crew, right? So absolutely accepted by flag, with all the paperwork in place, nice and neat. But then they step on board, right? And it's when we come into the picture, for which they are not necessarily trained for that specific operation and that specific vessel.
And I think it's interesting with how dynamic, the boats are now with the systems that are, coming online, particularly dealing with heli-ops and things like that we see a lot now, submarines and all that, ensuring that the training is, going up. I know that Phil Robinson has committed a lot to, the onboard training as well as the online training. And I know a few crew trainers actually, like Marley right here, who are really investing in making sure that everybody is aware, does know how to do it, and does know how to do it on board. Just going to like cocktails, it's all well and good that you can do it on, on online or something, but try and do it when the wind's blowing, try and do it when you're, rolling a little bit. I think that's the different challenge. But I think, go ahead.
Sorry, just because we don't have to forget, right, that the vessel is an asset, and it's an asset from the operational point of view, engaged in dangerous operations. Because launching the tender, recovering the tender, is a dangerous operation. Launching the water toys, recovering the water toys, it's a dangerous operation. Some maintenance tasks are recognized as dangerous. So yeah, the onboarding process, be there with them.
The familiarization.
The familiarization, is part. We focus on the crew engagement.
Right.
We might talk about that later.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's kind of just switching back, where is it? I just lost my train of thought.
My fault.
No, it was right there. I think it's coming back around to, again, safety, understanding the procedures. Our compliance department's really big into the risk assessments, when things are gonna be handled on board. So as a safety manager, looking after, these high value assets, and more importantly, the culture and the safety of the crew members that are on board, as well as their owners, do you find that it's really imperative, to conduct internal audits on board the boats? Have a chance to talk to the crew, let them really speak, their mind on things, and make sure that everything is, working according to plan. Most importantly, when it's not,
That is it's absolutely important. But as JMS, for example, as a company policy, we carry out 2 internal audits. Despite even for full ISM vessels, the requirement is 1 internal audit per year. But we don't stop there. We regularly attend the vessel. It's paramount for us to know in which operations, as I said before, the vessel and the crew are engaged, right? Because when we implement our system on board, we don't want a crew member and the crew to feel like this is imposed, like, oh, that's the system, right? Implement it. No, we are there with them. Right? Again, it's part of create, as you mentioned, a culture of safety. When you get all the crew member involved, and they have to feel that there is their own system. It's beneficial for them, because these are the people that is on board, that is running the vessel on a daily basis.
And it's funny when you do find some pushback from people, it's good enough, and it's still like, well, you're still running the risk of like, some boats frustratingly, or like you still have the opportunity to like burn to death in your bed, but you're okay with that. We'll move that aside. That's kind of dark. But again, going into proper training and the proper use of things, obviously, Ben, this is something that's really important for insurance.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, definitely, I've seen an evolution over the last 2 years where the securities behind risk are implementing their own risk management surveys. Right? We see that very often, and there's a huge focus on crew elements as well within that, which is actually quite interesting to see how that might align with what a manager's doing themselves when we've got managers on the vessel as well. So these are all elements that definitely contribute to the insurance side. And I think the way I view that, and it is hard to impose it to a client because we do get kickback that it's almost intrusive on their operation that we want to be involved. But if anything, what we present to clients is that actually we're trying to drive an industry standard for safety across everything, right? So if we can bring these to the attention of the operation, they don't have to do them. This is just put into a certain standard, and really in a full cycle, we aim to benefit the clients that hold themselves to the higher standard. They don't have to, but it is cost beneficial for the clients to do so. So it's definitely something that we're trying to drive within our side of the industry as well.
Right. Value added, having the safety manager there then too, assessing that culture and keeping tabs on it as well.
Yeah, and I think it's hard always to say that having a manager involved is beneficial to an operation from a cost standpoint. There's loads of elements that come into the risk factor. But if we take cost away and look at appetite in itself, especially, and I know this is med focused, but if we just switch to the US quickly, storm exposed areas or cat exposed areas for us, if a manager's involved, it instantly becomes slightly more appealing to the market, and that ultimately affects rate because you have more involved that wish to offer on the risk, and then therefore price is driven down. So it does come full circle, but explaining that to owners sometimes is difficult.
Well, I think it's interesting, going back to the question on training, and particularly, weather is a big factor, that we're dealing with now, particularly severe weather, basically globally. And so we all know a couple of the incidents that have happened in the Med. So again, looking at like extreme weather, training, not even just for, almost for everybody to be able to recognize it. As a manager and as a, insurance, what kind of, do you think that that's like a good, I guess the good point is it's a good way in which to be able to respond quickly. Some of the things you are beyond control to come in, but at least knowing that somebody has the training, knows how to read what the patterns are, knows how to get the boat to where it's going to be safe and things. Again, just looking at that, how much is the training and the crew responsible for that?
I think from our standpoint, when we look at a risk, and we're sitting in London writing a risk that could be in the Med, could be in the US, we have to apply a certain level of common sense to our confidence in the operation. The closer we can get to the end client, to speak to the captain, speak to the management, speak to the family office, for example, and to understand their competence in those situations is massive for us to determine how we feel comfortable about risk. Ultimately, it could make zero difference in the event. It could be a completely fortuitous event, but that is what we're then here for. And I do think bringing those lines closer together that we've seen has proven dividends from a cost element to owners, but also blurring those lines between owner and end carrier is big for us.
Is there anything specific, regarding insurance that's applicable to only the Med?
From a safety element?
Just I think in general, things that apply here. Like the United States, we have, you've got the COFR, you've got the, you've got all pollution.
It would, in my eyes, in the broadest terms, it would depend on the size of the vessel. So smaller vessels under 30 metres that may take a composite policy, hull, P&I, everything. You need to make sure you have sufficient limits to trade in certain areas. We don't stipulate in the med covers like the US do, etc. So that's all, again, looking at your small to medium or larger vessels, the P&I club will take up a lot of that exposure. In terms of specific coverages for charter and stuff like this, it does come into it, Spain, etc. But nothing in the same way that the US essentially do that way.
So I think it's interesting, we're talking about, insurance sort of deciding the direction, where a boat's going to go and basically what they're going to do. So I think we're going to come back to sort of the purchasing of a boat. Now, an attorney had just pulled me aside and said, this thing had happened this year. The boat was, going to be sold to non-European, client. Boat went 12 miles offshore, the closing happened, they came back into France, got stamped. But then the boat was detained when it arrived in Italy, and so it's still there. And so there's a confusion almost between whether it's the right hand talking to the left hand, or laws are just so different. So between Erin as the attorney representing, the owner, then we've obviously got tax, and plus the agent who's coming in. Like, how when that's kind of circulating, in that situation, could you ensure that that we can avoid that? Like, the bad agents talking to everybody, agents talking to the other, courts to make sure that things were fine. Like, how can we, sort of avoid that stuff? And it's something that happens in the US a lot of the time, interpretations of law, and, well, this was fine here, but it's not here. Why? Is that the client's fault?
I would just add that I think you have to choose very experienced people. That's a first step, because when you're dealing with something like the topic of bad, it's very complicated, because there is this kind of subjective take on, in Italy anyway, because I had 3 new constructions a few years, like 2 years ago, in different facilities in Italy, and each one of them gave me a different answer about how to assure that there was no VAT due on delivery. So some would say go out, do the AIS, come back in. Some would say go out, keep going, go to a non-EU port, then come back. So it was pretty interesting and confusing, to say the least. But over time, you kind of see all the different strategies that these different ports impose, and so you naturally just go, well, I'm just going to go with the one that's 100% bulletproof, and that's go out into international waters, keep going, touch a non-EU port, then come back. Because you're risking a lot when you trust that this whole little AIS operation, which is good for one guy, is going to work for the rest of them. So I think it just comes down to picking people that are well experienced and have lived these kind of different scenarios. That would be my thinking.
Yeah, and I think it then comes in with, making sure, like, particularly with boat sells, how it's going to come in when you're dealing with a name change. Sometimes you're dealing with, change in owning company, change in importation, all that stuff. Is that really vital for sort of that agents and the agent to handle, or is that definitely something that you would take the reins on, Nick?
Actually, the agent in these circumstances follows instruction. We're not involved with the actual process of sale and purchase. We just follow instruction of the captain, and we advise accordingly what documents are required to clear in one country or the other country. The comment that needs to be made is that the Med is not one country. EU is not one country. We have EU and non-EU locations within the same sea. Also, for the sake of clarity and record, in Italy is one country. We have different maritime jurisdictions, and the different maritime jurisdictions translate and interpret the same law that cascades down from the European Union to Rome to the different maritime jurisdictions. So on this occasion, it would be best to follow the proven lead and not make experiments. But from an agency point of view, one quick comment on the insurance, for example, in the Med, when you are going to Greece or you're going to Montenegro, you need special insurance dispensation. You're going down to Egypt, you want to cross the Suez, you need to have also a special insurance dispensation to be able to cover the operation. And of course, as you very, very well said at the beginning, one thing owning a yacht very much about operating a yacht. And operating a yacht in different countries, even if it's the same EU, different laws and different interpretations of the same law apply.
Well, it's very funny because I think it was exactly you who had stated the first statement about owning the yacht and the difference, and I actually have a note here that each state is quite dynamic with different applications of the law. And so, again, as managers, we sometimes get frustrated. But again, working through the things between, Thibault as a VAT agent and then you, the importance of a network, I think is something that, is essential, certainly as a management company. If we don't have the answer, it's amazing to be able to call, thank you, Thibault, this summer a number of times. But I just think, again, with the importance of, the agent just being able to make things happen.
Yes, I mean, a diligent agency must, during the off-season, ensure that they have established channels with each state and each regulator to keep a dynamic communication and make sure that you're up to speed with the relevant legislation. Then, of course, we communicate to the industry, to the management companies, to the charter brokers, guys, this has changed, and you need to plan in advance for this change. Potentially your operation could be very, very different. And of course, EU is one thing, going outside the EU becomes a very different matter. And I highly advise, especially on non-EU operations, that advanced planning is absolutely essential to avoid any surprises or, worse, disasters.
And I think that goes into, charter licensing things. Thibault, the Spanish charter license now is a 4, 5, 6 month project before it's resolved. So, again, the advanced planning is key. Like, we're doing all the itineraries all the way through, next year now, just, based on what we're going to need and the time that it's going to take.
Yeah, definitely, and I can only agree with Nick's comments saying that, okay, Europe is something. Within Europe, you have EU jurisdiction, non-EU jurisdiction. EU jurisdiction are supposed to all apply common rules, but they are not all applying those rules in the same way. And then, within the same jurisdiction, like Italy, you have different interpretation on how the rules have been implemented in that specific jurisdiction. So, even if of course, we are trying to simplify our client's life in centralizing things. We always have to rely on some local people. For instance, one good example on our side is concerning our Croatian operations. Yes, we will be able to assist our clients on making sure that the custom status of the boat is fine for the use in Croatia. We will be able to assist our clients in obtaining a Croatian VAT number, because in the end it makes sense to have one single VAT agent in all EU jurisdictions. On a pure operational ground, it simplifies things. However, for instance, we are not covering and we are not doing Croatian cabotage license. That's something that you must handle with a local agent, with someone knowing people on the ground. And that's a quite good example. And to go back on what Erin was mentioning before, yes, indeed, even us at our level, we are facing different interpretation. And yes, indeed, Italian yard is probably the best example that we can have. Some of them, especially based in Viareggio, will be fine to deliver a boat in international waters, considering that it has the value of an export, while on the other side of the Italy, on the Adriatic side, they will request you to reach physically to a non-EU jurisdiction. So it might be explained by by simple geographical thing. In any way, when your boat is delivered on the Adriatic side, if you want to be back in the West Med, you won't be so far from Montenegro or Albania at a certain point. So that's a way to secure everybody. I would say that to summarize, and that's really something crucial in our part of the business, is really we have a pre-arrival, pre-delivery, pre-purchase decision to make and to all agree on. Because basically, when you are operating a boat in Europe, mainly you have the choice in having your boat as a commercial one or as a private one. And each option, of course, will have pros and cons. I mean, you have to realize that if you decide to be engaged and to put your boat under a commercial registration, handling a commercial importation, yes, indeed, on a pure charter perspective, it will open all the possibilities, almost all of them. I mean, the boat will be able to charter everywhere in the Med. It can be really complicated indeed in some jurisdiction, and yes, Spain is a kind of half a year process if you want to be ready for the season, definitely. But yes, you will be able to do it. That said, you also have to consider the owner's use and what are owner's intentions. Because, for instance, with one of the schemes that we have to import boats in Europe, which is the reverse charge mechanism, which is more or less the same thing that the Maltese can also do, which means that you are declaring the value of the boat, paying the VAT on that value, and then you are offsetting the same value with no cash flow, and local authorities grant you to do that process based on the intended commercial activities. For instance, when you're deciding to go through that process in France, it means that the boat for the 5 coming years must be fully and exclusively dedicated to commercial use in EU waters, not only in French waters. So that's really a kind of a definitive choice that you're making when you're following that way. So that's really why those pre-decision and those agreements to reach before the arrival, before the delivery of the boat are definitely the key, because we have seen some disaster, and unfortunately we can see some disaster every single season, having an owner not understanding why he cannot privately use his boat, even exporting the boat, even changing his mind. No, it's not possible. Even if you head to a new jurisdiction and come back, if the previous year you have imported your boat using this reverse charge mechanism, you're stuck with it. So definitely anticipation is key.
So what was the, what are you most proud of this summer, like having achieved? Because there's a lot of red tape that you're dealing with. So what was just something that, you're kind of like, we did that well? If you can talk about it.
Yeah, but I mean, we are really happy on our side when months before the arrival of the boat, we know that, okay, we are all the people involved, starting from I would say we are more or less never in contact with the owner directly, but starting from owner's rep, from charter manager, yacht manager, captain, of course, we are all in agreement, and we all know what will be the restriction in terms of use, depending on the private or the commercial choice. And more than really concrete things that we can do on the ground, that's really anticipating things, defining what will be the steps upon arrival of the boat. Sometimes we can also, especially for brand new boats or boats coming for the first time in the Med under one specific owning entity, we can mitigate the VAT exposure starting by a private use and then switching to commercial boat, which is of course not possible on the other way. So that's really a matter of discussion with the owner, related parties. Say, look, you have a real interest to using your boat maybe early season. It was maybe not your intention at start, but you will save quite a big amount of money doing it. So that's really when we're getting involved at an early process that we are pleased, and we know that we will do in the end a great job.
And I think it goes to pretty much everybody on the panel, trying to take a positive spin rather than focusing on, the negative, lessons learned. I would just say, what is, going to Nick? What was, an interesting thing that you learned this summer, or a lesson that was learned this summer, or what you achieved that was just seemingly unachievable?
Where can I start?
Seriously, you're a magician. You're a magician.
In the agency business, of course, we endeavor to be the extension of the captains or the crew arm and an interface to each state, the jurisdiction that the yacht is operating. And I mean, I have got disaster scenarios for every part of the way, but I mean, to come to a singular thing about this season, I would suggest that we suffer from misinformation. And when I was suggesting earlier that a diligent agency must establish communication channels with regulators and the state to be able to advise yachts properly. I have seen more misinformation or incomplete information being communicated amongst the industry that leads to tears, and leads to tears at the very last minute where the principal charter gets out on board. And this, usually is with how we can use certain things here. For example, we were talking earlier about safety and training and so forth. Personal watercrafts, there's different laws that apply in every different jurisdiction. And then there is confusion, and if the agent does not anticipate to inform and be proactive with the information subject to the operation of the yacht, things can become very complicated, and we're looking at very big fines or accidents or pollutions and so forth. But I can go on and on and on and on. Logistics, I mean, you think that you can send something from your house in the US to Turkey, and you think it's normal. Well, no, it's not.
Well, do you have an example of something like that that you were able to, make happen?
Well,
or avoid a problem, let's say,
yes, avoid a
initiative.
problem is when we discuss with the crew, and the benefit of working and operating with a company like BW Yachting is we operate in 30 countries with minimum 2,000 yachts and almost 20,000 arrivals. So statistically, we have got more information about what could go wrong and how we could avoid certain things. And it could start from the pre-arrival during the immigration process, that somebody, whether it's crew or guest, did not complete the immigration process properly, or the agent forgot to mention something. I'll give you an example, a funny one. Commercial yacht going to Northern Commercial yacht going to Northern Europe. Very diligent agency and very diligent processes. However, there was a part of the process that a single button was not clicked. And once the yacht arrived and cleared in, then the customs commandos attacked the yacht and seized all the alcohol on board. And it was a grand disaster for the owner, the guests, and the entire cruise. And this was really easily recoverable by following the right process. But again, with BW Yachting, having good relationship with every jurisdiction, we're able to clarify to authorities what went wrong. And usually when a fine is issued, we're able to argue and defend our clients and explain, and then able to alleviate it.
And so it's a relationship with, customs agents and things like that really does allow you to,
Correct, but I need to differentiate. I mean, there are formal relationships and there is formal processes of approaching certain subjects, and that where the bandits, if you want, they will misinform to avoid doing certain processes or adding cost to their operation as an agency, and potentially passing risk to the yacht's operation without the yachts even knowing. So, it's all well and good having insurance, having the training, having a certificate, but when the owner and principals are on board and things go wrong, this is where heads rolls. And this is where a diligent agency could not only save the day, but save people's jobs as well.
do you ever engage with an attorney on things like that? Like, if you're getting very annoyed, how frequently, is somebody like Erin called in just to, make sure that everything is going to work out, or worst case,
We
not
have quite a complex legal department in BW Yachting with different competencies, but as soon as I walked in, and I've asked for a business card from Erin, because it is the case where we're maritime agents. Of course, we're licensed agents to operate. However, we're not legal advisors, and we cannot officially pass on legal advice. Thus, we engage with different types of lawyers, different jurisdictions, different competencies, to be able to suggest to the yacht management, whoever, please do check before you press the button or you take a decision. And this is in most of, for clearance, I mean, simple things as controlled substances. People don't even think, and then things go very bad when Montenegro customs coming to the boat. Oh, okay, we will take in this.
In cash too. Yeah, sometimes
Cash
it's
is talking about KYC.
Yeah.
My 20 cents on the KYC has been Yachting operating 25 years. We always have KYC. And that is because we, as a global company, to be very responsible with the peoples and customers that we engage. And primarily it was the banking sector that was driving the KYC. Well, now, even as agents, we are not brokers, we're not selling yachts, we're not selling charters, we're just selling agent services, carrying boxes. We're still, the state, specifically here in Monaco, we've got two processes. In every other country, we have streamlined a very, very deep process of KYC in order for us not to have problems with the state or banking system in each jurisdiction. And it has become, cash has become the devil. Nobody wants to see, especially the states, they don't want, suppliers don't want to be paid by cash, the state does not want you to carry cash, they don't, and of course, we know the cash to master operations. I mean, in Monaco, there has been, I remember in the past, €1 million in cash to master, where these things are just, funny stories of the past. And right now, of course, everybody's pushing to digital currencies. But this is the trick when, again, it's all well and good in the EU. Go to Tunisia or go to Algeria to take fuel. This is where you actually need cash notes.
Well, yeah, and again, here in the EU, the Anti-Bribery Act and particularly the money laundering, that we really all have to pay attention to, particularly coming into, the cryptocurrencies. Erin, do you have any experience with the cryptocurrencies as far as, the charter payments or just anybody transacting with it? Because we're slowly getting, into
I know that there are some groups that have been willing to accept cryptocurrency, but it's still very, very infant state, in my opinion, at least in the United States.
Yeah, and I think that the issue is tracking it all the way back, because it's kind of a perfect, way in which to, glean money along the way. And, yeah, exactly, don't know who it is, from the very end. So I guess it goes back to the word recommendations here. So it's been many, many times, I think everybody in this room, and particularly as a yacht manager, sometimes the captains think they know best. And so we often just say, even if you think you know best and you've been here and you've done it before, there's going to be something that's just a little bit different, and that's going to create a massive headache for you. And so we also tend to tell people, better be safe than sorry. And then sometimes you've got some of the captains who are, trying to prove themselves. They're saying, I've got this, I know somebody, we'll make the whole entire thing happen. So, in just certain instances like that, and I think this applies to, everybody across the board, when a captain, is there anything straight off, the top of your head from the summer, that you were able to kind of say, Captain, that's really a bad idea, you're gonna have to go this way? Even if I don't know, but we often find out that people don't ask, if it's okay until after the fact, and there's a huge fine that's associated with it, or there's a bill that comes with it, and they didn't say anything about it. So, particularly with even anchoring here now.
You would just hit the nail in the head where I was just about to say, advanced itinerary planning is, which country is going to go, what clearance procedures you need, and so forth. And when it comes to the day-to-day, anchorage has been quite the subject, where the Pocinelli areas, maybe they're not communicated properly, and again, the agent fails the boat when they're not communicating not only where to anchor, but also how to anchor, and what is the likelihood, if the weather turns like this is what you have to do, if the weather turns like this is what you have to do, and also a diligent agency keeps, hour by hour communication with the yacht, in order for them to avoid any surprise or disasters. And then anchorage is one thing, then anchorage not only for Posidonia as well, in certain areas there are restricted zones that maybe they're not mapped properly.
Yeah.
And we have had this very much in the Red Sea, for example. Now you see the Red Sea, Newmarket, Middle East, boats are coming down. Some of them are very experienced and they know, but most of them they don't. And then the authorities, they're not maybe as organized as other jurisdictions with digital means to be able to communicate. And we are not talking only about fines, disasters, but on one occasion, another funny one, it was the Navy that called us, and they said to us specifically, you need to tell this boat to shift right immediately because we are targeting them. They are a restricted military zone. There is some sort of exercise going on, and please. Oscar, you have something to say?
Yeah, no. I would have something to say, but I will wait the time to say it. I will wait for the time to say. Oh yes, you know the risk you're taking, right?
I know. If anybody would like to say anything, ask
We
me
can,
questions
we
or
can,
have a
we can
similar
start
situation.
ordering dinner when I pick up the microphone. And Oscar Sitges, I've been in the business for a long time. Used to be Superyacht captain in the 80s. We almost had rowers on the boats, not even Hermant engines. Anyway, I want to say two things about this and the Navy and the areas. As long as there were charts, there were markings where the areas were that you could not sail or you could not drop the anchor. That has not changed. British Admiralty charts have that incredibly well marked. And there is a small little book that goes electronically now also that is called Help for Sailors or something like that. Tiny little book that tells you every 15 days the corrections you have to make, including exercises that are coming in the next 2 months on the areas. So the excuse of, I didn't know, no, it's not good enough. The thing is, people is too much used to top technology and leaving too much decisions to what the electronic things say. The other thing is a lot more from the base. Sorry, I mean, my hands are shaking quite a lot, but it's like that. We talked about certifications, we talk about responsibility of all these people to try to get the right crew. Documents, having all the documents ready, dealing with the things. Listen, yachting, nautical business is still 98% people business. Not even the boats, it's the people that goes on the boats. It's the people ashore that helps the people that are on the boats. It's people business. And the document, you don't go in, let's say, Casablanca and put a certificate on a scanner. You show it to someone. If you have the right attitude when you present documents, that's half of the way, believe me. And it happened to me. If you let them feel that they call the shots, and that you are doing as much as possible to get everything right and to have the good certifications, you have a lot less problems than if you go, with a cocky attitude and say, yes, you can check in internet that all what I have is right. So it is the people, and I haven't seen any training for that yet, at least, but that makes a difference.
And I think it goes to Paul too. When you're selecting your captain, and it's like the willingness to, say, I'm not going to say I didn't know. And then sometimes when you don't know, it leads to an insurance claim and some other worse things. When it comes through though, if somebody has made an honest mistake and things, and there isn't a claim that's made to it, and it's kind of expensive, is that still something that is really a strike against the crew member? If they're anchoring the wrong place, or if there's been an incident or an accident or things, but if they've been helpful and upfront and say, yes, I didn't know, but I honestly didn't know, how does that influence, selecting of the crew?
I mean, there's two sides to every story, we know that, and you're innocent until proven guilty, you could say. But going back to the comments here, it is about people and personalities. And I was at a little meeting this morning, we were talking about personality testing or psychometric testing, if you want to call it that. But there's a lot about, again, this goes back to the right fit, the right person, the right attitude. And that is definitely what this is about here. It's a people business. And yeah, you go into a port and you're cocky, and you've got whoever's coming on board, they're going to tell you to, go away, thank you, or maybe not so polite. But that's the important thing to remember. that it is about the fact that we're talking about people dealing with people, and that comes to being selected. And often for us in recruitment, you know, candidates, whoever it might be, whatever rank, they're our best friends because they want us to be able to get them their next position or the next job on board, the next role. So they're very nice to us, and obviously, you know, they hope we're going to be able to help them. But you know, with this kind of industry as it is, there's a lot we can maybe learn from other industries, maybe even commercial shipping, as well as stuff happening shoreside. That is happening, I think, to make certainly the selection of people better. But in this modern digital world, which we can talk a lot about, everything from social media, you know, that's an important point. What people are putting on their social media, you know, suddenly recruiters see that, owners reps see that, the captain sees that, whoever, anyone else can see that. Yeah, this is it, and that puts maybe an X against your name or whatever.
Yeah.
So this world we are now in doesn't necessarily make it easier in some ways, it makes it more complicated. And there's a risk on all that, of course.
Yeah, I think the instantaneousness of everything.
It is there, available, you know,
Tokyo,
straight away.
Yeah. So then going to Ben and things like that, you know, if it has been something in the Mediterranean, anchored in the wrong place, the captain has an issue, and if they're looking at a new job, and obviously we have to get, you know, no claims and get the captain approved in order to run a boat, you know, do things like that affect a decision, or is it really still sticking like it was a, you know, poor decision, didn't know, they have the right license, let's do it?
I think it'll come down. It'll be situation dependent, right? It'll be based on the facts of what's gone on, whether there's someone vouching their case as well when that approval comes in. I think it all can get taken into consideration. And it's making me laugh a little bit because an area where we've seen captains and social media align a little bit. Earlier, I'd say the last 18 months, up to the Red Sea, there's been a huge area for us on the insurance side where we can add value. And the back and forth between owners and captains has been interesting for us because we've seen a huge surcharge in costing to transit through the Red Sea, which, you know, naturally produces kickback from owners' representatives, captains, the like. And for us, really, it's been a huge educational process, right? Because risk, we look at exposure, and the yacht market, although is its own market in its own right, we are heavily dictated by the commercial market, commercial marine market, which is still using that shipping lane to a great extent, and the yachts going through far fewer number than they were in previous years. And one of my favourite ones that we had last year was in the height of the volatility, we had a 80-foot Nordhaven, wanted to go through US flag, US ownership, right in the midst of it, to which we couldn't actually achieve any terms, any appetite whatsoever, to which the captain told us that he had seen that they could go through on a Facebook group. And to that, I don't even think we responded to that comment. But it just shows you how they get wrapped up in the mix of thinking they maybe know better than us. And we were merely trying to educate them from a risk perspective. You know, this is how the price is here because it's this dangerous. And you know, we draw on that statistically as a market, but we also rely on risk assessment from those that are transiting on a daily basis.
I think it's interesting now with the U.S. flag, and particularly things that are going on, you know, globally now. You know, where they're going to travel. Is it really still? It's great in the United States and things like that to have it. You know, USA, okay. But I'm curious, just based on anything you've observed, you know, through the Med, is there something where people aren't necessarily as friendly? You know, we've got some boats that are doing a world cruise. Is it better? You know, do you think that they are change flag to something that is more, you know, friendly around the world, or, you know, something that's not going to, you know, create like vitriol or something like that? You know, it's an honest question now with people, you know, going, how volatile is that flag? Is it valuable anymore? Is it still difficult to go around, or is it just better to take a pause on it now for the next couple of years? And
I think US flag's an interesting one. You know, if you look at the Red Sea, yes, it's making a difference in areas.
Yep.
It's submission dependent. The main thing I draw upon on US flag, which from an insurance standpoint, which is really basic, you know, US flag, US ownership, in a US or Caribbean mooring is really strong in terms of market appetite, opens up the domestic market, so cat exposure, cat cover, wider coverages are usually in play. What we see as a bit of a problem area is a vessel that a US owner that might choose the US flag and choose to stand in it for the first year, for example. That actually causes some, not complications, but actually we see in some cases problematic for terms, because the flag for us on the insurance side is the risk location.
Yeah.
So our licensing is dictated by the flag. So you'll have domestic carriers or Italian carriers, French carriers that wouldn't be able to offer terms on that risk, and they would be favourable in terms of from a pricing standpoint. So the choice of flag not just politically, but it actually can have a driving effect on premiums charged.
Yeah, and I think going to Luca and again to Nick, there's always a discussion about, the flags of convenience and things like that, and it comes down to adding value, I think, where it is. Sometimes with manning and those type of things. We know that there's limitations, between using the yet, you can only do that between, Marshall Islands, Cayman, not yet kind of okay on the fringe in, Italy, to be accepted, but now, available in Croatia. But going to the discussions that we had about, Greece and Turkey right now, and again, Ben with like Turkey, coming in, I think people have a little bit of a misunderstanding, of being able to cruise in Turkey, of what some of the consequences are. We had a boat who wanted to go ahead and change to, a Cook Islands registration, so they had a dual registration, but that doesn't work when you're going to go into, Turkey. It's private, there's a whole thing, and then when you want to return back to, the Med, there's a whole other, round of things that you need to consider. So it's not quite so easy just to carry both and flip them like it might be in the Caribbean or, in the Bahamas. So just based on, your experience, Luca, is there anything that you would recommend, any lessons that you've learned, I guess, with a better flag that's more friendly? I know there's limitations with, in the States with like PYLC and things that doesn't work, over here too. But just in your experience, do you have a preference?
I can tell you that from our perspective, we are not working with flag of convenience. Right? First of all, despite the registration, so if it's a pleasure vessel or commercial vessel, we run our vessel at commercial standard. Right? The crew is appreciated at it as well, owners as well, so it's working. And for us, in terms of risk mitigation, it's what we need to do. Because maybe, I don't know if it's on your list for later, right? But there's a difference between pleasure and commercial. It should be there. It should be there. That said, no, from Marshall to Cayman to Malta, these are the flags that we are working with, right? But if there is an owner come and say, I want to go to Jamaica, or what we will advise maybe on the fact that other choices are definitely better. Definitely better.
And I think it's easier to do business under certain flags here. I certainly don't have a lot of familiarity with the Malta flag. I've got one that's going to be coming over into the U.S., so now I need to educate myself on the ins and outs of that. And thank you, Erin. I'm now really looking forward to that. But I think this year Turkey and Greece seem to be really popular destinations for cruising this year. Certainly a lot of our fleet boats, Will Robinson did. So what are just some of the different, obviously chartering is a little bit different. What are some of the things that you need to consider for charter there, or even just visiting Turkey these days? It's not that simple. Go ahead.
Greece and Turkey indeed is pretty challenging. The thing is that Turkey, that's challenging, but in the end it's pretty simple. I'm not talking about potential maritime requirements arriving in Turkey, and there must be some definitely. But on a more global perspective, in Turkey, if you're going there under private registration for private use without any transaction involved, okay, that's quite clear, simple, the boat is privately registered and you can head to Turkey. If you want to go to Turkey under transactions, under charter contracts, first you must have in place a Turkish charter license, which is extremely expensive.
Like $250,000 or
which means that that's depending on the size of the boat, the gross tonnage, and so on. But I mean, even if a client starting his charter from Greece, ending in Greece, just want to spend, let's say, 3 days in Turkey, he will need to apply for a 10 days charter license. You don't have a choice, that's a package. And then you will pay maybe 200,000 euro for those 10 days. So that's crazy, that's the first thing. Then also the boat must be commercially registered. There is no way to be privately registered being under charter contracts in Turkey. So that's things to consider. And then to go a bit back on the discussion of the flag, I would say that on an EU standpoint, the choice of the flag is quite flexible. I mean, there is a quite flexibility as long as it is a well-recognized flag. I mean, you are able to enter into EU waters with all kind of flag. The thing which really matters in terms of customs and fiscal aspect is more than the flag and more than the type of registration, because in the end, private or commercial is a technical aspect, a technical matter, mainly related to requirements, technical requirements on board, some obligations for the crew and so on. So definitely on the crewing, on the insurance perspective, it must have impacts. On our side, it's really the custom status of the boat which matters. So the yacht scheme is a quite good example because, and also for joining it with the Turkish point, is that we advised some clients this past season, those boats were operating under the yacht scheme for charters perspective. The yacht scheme has been officially recognized in Greece, no problem at all. So we can manage to obtain the e-charter permission and so on based on the yacht certificate of registry. It's not a big deal. But then, if ever during the course of the charter, the client wants to head to Turkish waters, you must anticipate things. So it means that before arriving in Greece and before applying for your e-charter permission, you have to keep in mind that, okay, if I want to allow the client to spend those few days in Turkey, we need to be commercially registered. And basically, you can flip from private yacht registration to commercial registration without affecting your custom status. But one more time, all that must be anticipated, planned in advance, discussed, and agreed on what is the planning, when you have to do the switch, and when you will switch back then to private registration.
If I'm allowed, Turkey, Greece, I'm Greek myself, so maybe I'm allowed. There is this one thing we all need to recognize, which is very obvious, is the cross-cultural factor. I'm Greek, Oscar is Argentinian, we say the same thing, we understand two different things. This is the one thing. Then again, language itself is a problem. You know, in Turkey, they speak Turkish, not necessarily that they have to speak English. It's not like the USA, you go to France as well, some places, and somebody's speaking broken English and there is miscommunication. But in Turkey, disaster. And of course, it has been a disaster. And we have been in Turkey, we've been in Turkey for 20 years, and we have 7 offices. And we have seen a massive dip in commercial operations this year. And we have got access to Erdogan's government, and we say, guys, what's going on?
When do they implement the charter fee, like the license fee that's so high? That's new, isn't it?
This year.
Yeah, it started last year. But, I mean, all charters were in summer season of boats were booked, and it was done. But mainly, it started really effectively from this season.
So is that something that contributed to the drop off of?
I would suggest that absolutely now we're analysing all the traffic, all the signals that have been in Turkey the past year, and we have noticed that not only very large yachts did not go, but even the volume of arrivals have been halved. And this is a problem, but I mean, we need to all understand that Turkey is not just normal operations at the moment. I mean, there is trouble in the economy, and we're operating on Turkish lira, there is great inflation, and we have all sorts of problems with human resources, and so forth. And this was a response of the government to be able to balance the books a little bit. And it was only that for the brokers of the world, there is now a brand new 8% plus VAT, which is something new. Although I have to say the Turks on the operational side are very organized, and the port authorities, the entire ecosystem, very organized, very diligent, and so on. But I can confirm that because of the, can we call them extortion fees? Because there's points of view. Are they really extortionate? Big rich people are making millions in charter. Why should they not pay a couple of $100,000? But this had a tremendous effect on the operation in Turkey. Now the Greeks. I mean, we have been speaking about the Greeks in conferences like this for years and years. And 10 years ago there was no cabotage, and captains and owners sometimes say, Nick, we want to pay VAT in the country and we can't. And we feel that we're doing something illegal, so we might as well not go. And then, of course, the cabotage, there is local politics between Greece and Albania, then Greece and Turkey, where Greece was a traditional cruising ground. There was nothing in Turkey, nothing in Albania, and because of the policies of the Greeks and cabotage, all of a sudden, we as PW Yachting, we were very happy about it, because we were the first to open in Albania, one of the first to open in Turkey. And the business of Greece is like, Monaco feeding Menton and Nice. It was exactly what was happening. And now the Turks want to have the road. They have got a lot of shipyards and the industry is quite large, but unfortunately on the operational side, it has been a bit of a failure this year, and I really, really hope the result and the revenues of the industry this year in Turkey might be telling them, guys, we might have to change something.
And so just looking to insurance with that, is there any sort of additional, does insurance, if you're going to go into the renewals, with regards to, cruising areas and things like that, is there anything to be considered or advance warning necessary from an insurance perspective?
So, again, it is submission dependent. So, if you're on a worldwide trading area, everyone's subject to the war risk trading areas. So, there's been new ones that have come in, obviously, over the last 2 years with Black Sea, Red Sea, etc. Turkey, depending on what side you're on.
Yeah.
The Black Sea side would require some additional information, but it's not necessarily come up too much from a risk element on the men trading side. So the riskier trading areas we're seeing at the moment is Red Sea. That's probably been the hot area for 18 months now, and is now softening, but I think that will reside for a considerable period to go on from. So that's the trading area that we're seeing become increasingly more popular, and not necessarily slowing down with what's going on. But again, as few have said on this panel, proper planning needs to take place for that, and that war rate, so to speak, is valid for a very short period of time. So you can come to us 6 months away, that price could be completely different by the time it gets there. They're valid 48 hours. So we've seen tremendous changes in rate from one day to the next. And again, it's don't just look at the yacht volume, it's dictated by the commercial market. So if a commercial vessel goes down, the yacht's going to pay for it as well.
So again, going towards the end of the season, so now there's a whole lot of stuff at play, geopolitics and that. So the one thing that we found with a lot of the boats that we have are planning maintenance periods. They're kind of now dividing it between, or many have, dividing certain works that are going to be conducted in the United States, and then certain works that are going to be conducted here in order to control the extra cost that's associated with that. But again, going into any particular things that are different, Erin in particular, for doing work within a European shipyard versus doing work in a U.S. shipyard. In the States, we've got issues with the ship repairs liability and limits and things like that. Is there anything that you found in the Med that's different, or particularly coming into TPA opportunities and things like that? What have you sort of learned, or what's a good key recommendation?
There's a couple things that I've noticed happening over the years, which is, one is essentially everything really is insurance driven. You have to have the proper insurance. The other being the liability that the shipyards are willing to take on is just shrinking. So it's becoming like a risk shifting exercise where everybody's trying to shift all the risk onto the owner's plate. And as a lawyer, of course, we try to shift the risk off the owner's plate, or at least do something more, fair. But we have shipyards just saying, "Oh, we're not going to accept that. That's what our underwriters require." So we see a lot of the shipyards kind of basically supporting their underwriters, not trying to put any risk on them. So it's just difficult because we're all facing the explosion of yachts and not enough slips or spaces or slots to get the work done. So the shipyards are empowered to just basically say, take it or leave it. And so it really kind of, for me at this point, many times boils down to insurance, but it's so key. And I don't see a lot of differences between the U.S. and Europe with respect to insurance, but contract insurance is becoming a much more important thing, whereas nobody even really thought about that before. So the contract liability being like the risks you take on by a contract versus just something that would normally flow from your policies. So we look very closely at that, and we've had a lot of issues with that.
Just lost my train of thought again. So going back to, basically Erin saying insurance is covering a lot of that stuff. I've seen in some of our negotiations, we can't come to a resolution with the insurance, and sometimes it's like, bag that, we're not gonna do our business here, we're gonna go find somewhere else to go.
So, the shipyard's really interesting. There's a couple of solutions that are out there in the market at the moment that do combat that risk element, but then they bear cost to the owner, and then the owner doesn't want to pay. And I think this was something that came in years and years ago, and if I was speaking from a pure insurance standpoint, take premiums out of it, and what we like to consult to our clients is that if they go in for a yard period to say excess of 6 months, they should cancel their operational yacht policy, put a builder's risk policy in place, which then charges them by month that's in the yard. Now, in that transaction would provide the proper cover. The SRL elements would be taken out of it because a builder's risk carrier would be happy to pick up ground up. The problem is it's a lot more expensive for the owner. And ultimately, if some carriers are willing to take on some of that exposure, it creates a marketplace where they're all fighting over this battle. And the situation you described does come up often. I mean, again, not to pin down to US yards, but I see it more in US yards that try to pin their liability to value of the contract or even less so. Now we have managed to come up with some solutions where if you look at the work list itself, if it's just pure haul out and everything else is subcontracted, then we can accept a slightly lower limit. But then you've got to look into the subcontractors, and there's a lot more work to go on there. I think I'd say 5 years ago, you used to have a standalone SRL program, which could be an owner's own policy. That went horribly, because I think what I perceive and what we explain to owners, that shipyard wording, so it's typical to see a minimum in an operational yacht policy. Our expectation is 5 million SRL from the yard and 2 million for a subcontractor. Now, whilst that's something to benchmark off, I think why security does that is a moral issue for the yard to take some accountability in the shipyard period. So it's that pushback that I think becomes very difficult. It must be very difficult for clients because clients not understanding that each is trying to push off the exposure that they feel should be on the other party. So, and they do fall by the wayside for that. So I do think it is a problem area, and it's going to be a standoff, and it will continue to be that way. I believe it should be on the yard, and we sit on both sides of this, and I do think that the yard should be taking some form of primary level, especially with some of the values that are going into the yard.
So then going to the yard, obviously, you've got times that are just, 10 weeks or something like that. You're just making your maintenance repairs, things ready to turn around and just go and deal with the next season. But Paul, in some locations like, Holland now, if the crew's gonna be there for a long period of time, they now have to deal with the social charges. and things that are withheld there. Do you know any further, or can you elaborate a little bit further on that for us?
Well, yeah, it's okay if you're in the EU, but me being a good old Brit, and not going to get political and talk about Brexit, does cause a problem there with how many days, certainly from our British colleagues and those in the industry, can spend in Europe, and that has been a challenge. It is more difficult. Getting a work visa, obviously there's a process to do that, but that's not so straightforward. So it comes down to how many days you spend in the country, and if you need to spend longer, really you should have a visa to make sure you are going through the correct process. Not something we've done a great deal of from my experience, but it has come up, certainly with some of the new builds, having, shall we say, international crew that are not, or that are outside, holding an EU passport. And you know, the British population within the superyacht industry is a big, you know, fairly large population. Ben and I here, we're both British, so for sure. And we know the challenges with coming into Europe, even just for, you know, business trips and so on and so forth. So for actually coming into work, when you could quite easily spend as much time as you wanted in Holland or in the yards in Germany. So more preparation, more planning, and really working then with the yards and with maybe the agent there to ensure that appropriate visas are applied for if you are going to be spending a considerable time in a yard period.
So do those days, like, so if you've been here for the season, you know, sometimes there's 90 days, sometimes people don't leave the boat to control the number of days that they're actually, you know, in the Schengen area. Does that count towards this, or is that all part of the, it does? Okay.
Yeah, and then you bear in mind if you're maybe on an SEA, you know, you could be signed on as that, which means you could be signed out of the country. As was mentioned, I think earlier in the start of the session here with Europe, it is the EU, but every country does something different. So to say it's not straightforward, it's definitely not straightforward. Things are changing from the 12th of October, with regard particularly for those of us like those holding British passports or outside the EU coming into Europe. So there is some changes into that process with a new electronic system being introduced that then will be effective across the whole of the EU. This is something that's been in the making for some time. Let's see if that improves things, but it doesn't change how many days you can stay in the EU. And I think it means it's going to be a little bit more computerised, so it probably will be a case of your days really will be up to the maximum, and then you've got to consider to get back to, let's say, the UK.
So then going to Luca, how do you plan for that? You know, if we do know that, you know, one of your managed boats, you've got the employment side of things, you know, there, is it strategic to try and, you know, send crew away for as long as you can for it? You know, engage in like the shipyard help for it, just to control, you know, those days, you know, the cost of the days of being there. Like,
definitely, usually the refit period are right moment, right? To grant leave to the crew. As we say, usually it's the end of the season, right? Across Christmas period, so usually yes, it's absolutely the right time. It's true that in Italy we had the case, right, in which they implemented a visa, right? So the crew had to go to Geneva and then come back. Otherwise, they were just remaining there 90 days. Right, that happened with the conversion of an 86 meters, right? So 1.5 years work in which definitely yes, we have to consider put that right on in the picture, right? But yeah, the rotation usually is the solution.
So do you notice, like with our fleet, we've got, you know, boats that head over to the U.S. for the winter time, and then they will head over to the Med, and so again, things sometimes seem a little bit easier, you know, in the U.S. and then they come, you know, on this side. How do you sort of support, you know, boats that are based in the U.S. or what sort of guidance do you give them, you know, in advance of things that they need to expect? You know, do you have recommendations of your preferred vendors or preferred agent or preferred VAT agent or, you know, things like that you would do? How do you make it simple so that they can still get things done and feel?
In our case, but the reply is very simple. I will just hand it over to the US team. Say, okay, call Nick, not you, but my colleague in the States. Right, so at least, jokes apart, but we can provide that kind of coverage. Right? So we remain, yes, focused on the Med. It's already a very complex environment. Right? So yeah, we remain focused on the Med, and then for those that are planning to go to the States, we open the communication with the Fort Lauderdale office. And our network.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, the key of communication. And I think some of the things that we've learned as planning is, number one, taking the recommendations, don't make assumptions, because assumptions make an ass of you and me. And so I think that to me is very clear. And I think working with everybody and being able to have a network like this that you can call upon the experts, I think is essential, for successful operations, particularly, here in the Mediterranean. Excuse me. Does anybody have any questions or any comments on things, or a situation that they saw and was handled in a particular way?
I was going to say, one of the other things, Paul, was one of the other issues. We talk about Europe and Turkey in the UK now, bringing a yacht to the UK. If you're in the UK for some weeks and months and ports, you are liable to UK tax and national insurance. You have to be very careful, don't you?
Well, yeah, we're now in a third state. I mean, we're outside the EU. We are Great Britain. So with that, if you are in, you will have to pay taxes as required by UK government.
Is there like 10 ports in one cruising session or something like that?
That is effective, I think, from next year to do, particularly with the cruise industry and small ships. How that works on the yachting side, not 100% sure. But certainly that's coming in from a cruise ship perspective with some regulations there, yes.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Or any more on that? Peter?
I would suggest that every mariner needs to take some responsibility for their immigration status, because you might fall victim to misinformation or whatever and then get kicked out of the boat. And again, I would suggest if somebody takes responsibility, do their own due diligence and then follow through. Also, there is occasions that people forget to stamp out. And
the
then,
refit in the UK is the same, isn't it?
and then some people get confused. I mean, a 40 flag yacht is 40 flag territory.
Yeah.
There is ways to maintain the 90 days by not exiting the yacht or specific surpasses, utilizing Siemens books, etc.
Are we saying then, is it the master's responsibility then to do that?
To be perfectly honest, the master is responsible for the entire ship, its safety, its operation, and we agents exist to support masters regardless of the level of their experience, because things do change and are dynamic, and this is where licensed maritime agents can advise properly. Usually most agents have got what they call the formalities department. So, I mean, immigration is the one thing, but I haven't heard anybody talking about the new legislation about artwork.
Ignorance is not an excuse, is it?
The artwork due diligence is going to be quite interesting coming into the next year. Some yachts, crazy prices. They have got some artifacts within these yachts, so they are even crazier. And this also needs to be diligently followed, and you see the workload is excessive, not just for the master of the ship or the yacht, but for the manager, for the agent. There's a lot more regulation going in. But just to some rounding comments about yachting, and again, from my humble experience in operating in so many countries and try to help regulators and touring boards to develop strategy, is that our numbers are very little. Boating is a very different thing, commercial shipping is a different thing, yachting is a very small niche. So, countries do not want to put the effort or the energy to look at yachting or super yachting in a very direct way and legislate as such or facilitate or release. And it's our job and the job of the entire industry to be able to explain the economical impact of our industry, if you want to call it that, because if we start playing with technical terms, we might not end up in the same conclusion. And this is where every one of us has got the duty of care to educate and have discussions with the regulators and the states and the ports And in an organized manner like this, to suggest, guys, I mean, you need to look at this industry and make it easier, because the white yachts, you know, if they find it difficult in the one country, they very quickly go to another country. And also, from our point of view, the difficult part of the job is to facilitate an entire international navigation when we're going from EU to non-EU or Northern Europe, for example. We're talking about the Red Sea and the Middle East, which is, yes, I mean, it's funny enough, it's the hot thing and it's chaos down there, although, you know, it poses an opportunity for ships and yachts sitting here in the winter to do charters. And they don't go to the Caribbean, but Northern Europe is another new market that statistically claims around 4 to 5% of the global fleet. And we have got, and I'm not talking about the UK or the Netherlands or Germany, I'm talking about Denmark, I'm talking about Norway, Sweden, Finland, Faroe Islands, what's the other one? Iceland.
And Russia when it opens again.
Hopefully when Russia opens again, I mean, we had great experience in Russia and the Black Sea back in the day, nice cheap berthing. So again, I don't want to go on and on and on and on, but from my humble experience, I do know that, I mean, we struggle. We struggle talking to the Spaniards, we struggle talking to the Turks, we struggle even more talking to the Greeks. I'm Greek myself, just to put it out there. But slowly, slowly, countries look at other countries and we see what they do right. For example, look at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where these guys were holding back, investigating, looking, and they try to create a circumstance where it's easy and everything is on one platform and you know, common to a country. Yes, and maybe I leave it at that.
Anybody with any other questions? Any comments? Well, I guess, you know, because my co-chair Pete's now here, I'm going to let him take it off with the, are you just here for a little bit? Right. No, so Pete always likes to have these things coming away with you know, a key takeaway. And so, you know, obviously I think we found that planning's huge. We just, yes.
Sorry, I wasn't going to say something, but I will say something. But apologies for my tardiness. I've been moderating the Maori Forum, so that's hence the reason I'm here now. But to speak to your point, we've just had exactly the same conversation in the Maori Forum about us as an industry. We have an image problem. People don't realise how important this industry is, and we're always under attack by the regulators. I don't think the regulators understand our business, and we do have a responsibility to help our clients who basically, if it wasn't for the UBOs in our industry, none of us would have jobs. But it's our job to help these guys navigate the regulatory environment, the regulatory world. How we do that, we're not sure. I mean, I think engagement is definitely important. Then I speak to your point. I think if we could find a body that could engage with the regulators and really demonstrate, how powerful this industry is, how many people this industry employs, and what we can actually do with yachting, is going to make the whole thing much better for everybody. So I just wanted to add that in because we more or less, I'm coming in here now, listening to you for 10-15 minutes, and I could have been in the other room because we were talking about exactly the same issues. So I think that this is just an illustration that we've got the Maori Forum talking about this, we've got the ISS talking about this, we've got probably the USSA talking about this, we've got the Water Revolution talking about this. So why don't we all get together and work together as a unified body to try and address some of these issues, engage with the regulators, deal with the image problem that we have. It's going to be better for all of us. Anyway, that's my I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you.
So Erin,
Let me hold the microphone like this so it's not so impressive with the shaking. With the regulators, we have been doing trying to access them in two ways. One way was imposing. We know what we talk. You are not doing a good job. You have to listen to us. Doesn't work. Those guys, let's say that in the levels of politics and the whole thing, they are superior to us because they call the shots. We don't call the shots. We are going to them to take them out of their comfort zone. So we have to be careful about it, right? The other way is we go begging. Please, we need you to let us do this. We need you to make this other point. We need you to make the things easier. So they drop us a cookie, like they do to a Labrador, and what the Labrador does, we. You know? They move the tail and are happy. So we are happy. So we let another 6 months pass to see what can we find to get another cookie. We run a very interesting experience in Singapore about 12 years ago. We were doing the Singapore, I was participating, doing the Singapore conference. And we were inviting politicians from Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, all the area. The guys were totally stiff in the discussions, of course, because they knew they were facing people that knew what we were talking about, and they had not a clue. So, and in those cultures, that is a lot worse than in the Western world, right? So one day I suggested that we would just let them come a couple of days before and meet among them, even without us, discuss the thing, and if they would have questions, they would just pop it out to us, and we would answer or participate, half an hour or something in the conference. It worked wonders. Regulators hate exposure if they cannot control it, and we have to bear it in mind. I have an idea that if we form a group of people that could approach them with the necessary anonymity, maybe faking the thing, because the media will know sooner or later. Secrets are things of the past, completely. So that approach them, discuss the thing, and try to explain them, trying to know their limitations too, because they have their limitations to issue new regulations or something. We could do a big step forward that would be fantastic for all of us, them and us.
So then, Erin, this brings up, ISS and the, ICOMIA and a little bit of influence with the IMO. So, it's our chance, going back to what, Peter said, it really, take a little bit more advantage of that. We now have a voice. And I think everybody, can sort of band together if there's a message that we can come, with, to try and have a little bit more of an influence. And going to Peter's point, yeah, we are important. It's valuable. All of us, make our living, off of the yachts, and it's a huge contribution to the economy. So I don't know if you want to touch on just a little bit about that, or if it's of interest, but I just think, going to the message now of everybody trying to have a bigger influence.
No, we're always looking for ways, I think, as Barrett is saying, to kind of do good for the industry. It's hard because we have so many spin-off organizations now, and everybody's kind of doing the same thing, and we're all, I don't know, I put it, we're spinning our wheels because one group's doing this, and Pete just says he's in the next room, and everybody's talking about the same thing. Why aren't we all talking about this together? So, but we do look for opportunities at the ISS to collaborate. One of the things that we did this year was collaborate with ICOMIA, as Barrett has mentioned, to gain access for our members to IMO, which is important. They're the regulators, as Oscar was they're one of the regulators that Oscar was talking about. So we want to have we've been talking about it at the ISS for a very long time about getting that kind of access, but it's very cost prohibitive, and how can we do this? And it is important, and to wrap this up, to kind of collaborate together because with that collaboration, it's cost effective, and we're able to, share the cost of getting our members' concerns in front of the IMO. So, we're also, in our meeting today, we decided to work with another organization on crew mental health. So that's another topic that's been kind of running around the industry. But we can't all do it by ourselves. We have to, band together to try to, again, do good and for the industry and it's imperative. But that's, essentially what our take on is. We have been, over the years, we kind of were for many years the main organization in some ways that, because there really wasn't so many others, so we were one of the organizations that people would look to for help. But now there's, like I said, there's so many, there's hundreds of them now, I think. So, but we still are plugging forward to try to do our best and to try to educate our members and try to help our members and give you guys access to information and great people that have information and organizations like Nicolia.
Cool. Well, I think just in closing, I think the one thing with all the panelists here is we've gone through a Mediterranean season. Everybody's either coming back next year or not. So I would just say, what would be your number one point, to your client in planning a successful return? Ladies first.
I have been working, I think you're having the same problem. I've been working all year, all summer on a Spanish charter license. So if you plan on chartering in Spain, start now.
Next summer, that is.
Yeah, again, maybe do a good plan, try to consider some of the environmental changes and pest factors and manage a better itinerary and maybe get some more information or try to, speak to the end user and the principal in a very direct way about, what's the challenges in the one country or the other and let them make up their mind.
Yeah, I would say the same. Really, even if, of course, it's never something easy, but trying to obtain as soon as possible, let's say, some quite clear intentions from the owner and the end user, because that's starting from that point that we will work trying to meet with owner's expectation, and it will define the whole thing, how the boat will be used, how we should import her, and also, I presume, in terms of insurance and crew, who should we have on board, and that's it. So really trying to define with owners rep and owners directly what are the intentions for the coming summer season.
Okay.
For me, I would say really invest on crew training. Even allow them to have a proper team building, right? Because this is part of the future as well. So invest in crew, because as I said at the beginning, they are the operators of an asset, and they are making a difference.
Yep. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the same point for us that the others have reinforced here. Proper planning, proper itinerary for us to review, where we can make comments on any risk areas, shipyard periods, etc. So early notification to us is key.
Yeah, the same thing really. Luca's just said about crew, plan early. Make sure you know what you want, plan early for that, because otherwise it's too late. So we have them ready, training done, certification, everything ready for them to join. So early planning is the key.
Great. I think it's knowing the experts, knowing the network, and knowing when to do it is going to really the key to a successful event season. So I wanted to say thank you to all of the panelists for their time. Thank you to the audience for coming. I hope it was helpful and insightful. And we're adjourned.
I hope to see you. I hope you're coming to our cocktail event.